We're concluding this week the series of sermons on names in the Bible. We only made it to Exodus. We could probably go on for years with that theme. But this week we come to, as you just heard, the story of God's name. There are lots and lots of names for God in the Bible, but this is the name that God gives to the people, to Moses first. Last week when we were studying the name of Miriam, we were introduced to the suffering of God's people in Egypt. You realize when you have the kids sitting in front of you how hard it is even to talk about that in front of the children. The Egyptians were instituting basically a genocide against Israelite boys to keep the population under control. They were continually increasing the production that was required of their Israelite slaves. But for the first 2 chapters of Exodus, God had been mostly silent, just barely visible on the periphery of Israel's life as they became more and more oppressed by the pharaohs of Egypt. Was God oblivious to their suffering? Had the Israelites been abandoned by the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? Was the God of Israel less powerful than the God of Egypt? I imagine the Israelites asked all of those questions. So when God comes down in the form of a burning bush to call Moses to lead the people from slavery into freedom, Moses also has some questions, some reservations. First, about his own abilities. Who am I that I could do this thing you're asking? But then questions about God. Who are you exactly? What shall I tell the Israelites if they ask me for your name? It's kind of like, to me, that Moses is asking, what kind of God are you? Are you the kind of God that stays far away from your people who are suffering? Never been suffering and noticed how people sort of stay away? Are you that kind of God? Are you the kind of God who forgets your promises? Are you powerful enough to do what you have said? Who are you? What is your name? In the ancient Near East, giving your name, giving one's name, was a sign of availability, but also of vulnerability. Asking for someone's name might be a sign that you had power over them. Remember that when Jacob wrestled with God on the banks of the Jabbok River, even though Jacob had God pinned to the ground, which is almost unimaginable, isn't it? Jacob had God pinned to the ground, and God would not tell Jacob his name. God probably knew that Jacob, the schemer, would use the divine name to take advantage or to get ahead somehow. I think it's sort of like the way maybe you or I might drop the name of someone important that we've met just once or twice in order to get something that we want. Have you ever done that or thought about it at least? Oh, so-and-so said I should call you. Jacob would do that. To know the name of God opens the possibility of a deeper relationship, but it also opens the possibility of abuse and dishonor. God does not have to tell Moses his name. And I think Moses is pretty darn bold even to ask for it. This time, though, God does not seem to be worried about being taken advantage of by a schemer. Instead, this time, God is tuned in to the misery of his people. He's heard their cries. He knows their suffering. God is already drawing near to the people. God is already close to them, already feels their pain. Who are you? Moses asks. I am who I am, God answers. Tell them I am has sent you. By giving the divine name to Moses from the burning bush, God is saying, I care about my people. I have not abandoned them. It's the same for us, isn't it? When someone bothers to learn and remember and correctly pronounce or spell your name, you know that person is paying attention to you, that they care for you. Israel would know that God cares for them. Giving his name is a sign of God's intimacy and affection. But the name, I Am, is a strange one. Even for a Hebrew name, it's strange. More scholastic energy has been spent, more ink spilled, trying to interpret this one word. It's one word in Hebrew, not two. This one word, more than any other word in Scripture. The Hebrew letters that make up this name are, if you care about Hebrew letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, transliterated YHWH. We typically, if we say the name, say Yahweh. Though the earliest written Hebrew didn't tell you which vowels to stick between those consonants. YHWH. That's why we also sometimes say Jehovah. If you change the Y to a J, I don't know, it's like a thing. Like Germans say a J like a Y anyway, so Jehovah could be Yehovah, which is like Yahweh. It's probably not part of it. Anyways, the name, even to ancient Hebrew ears, would have been strange and otherworldly. Among Jewish people, it became so holy that you couldn't say it at all for fear that you would abuse it or dishonor it. To this day, most Jews do not say the word Yahweh. Instead, they say Adonai, which means Lord. Our Christian scriptures have adopted this tradition. If you look in your Bible, all those places where it says L-O-R-D, Lord, in like block capital letters, that's the English, not writing Yahweh, but writing Lord. It's like 7,000 times in the Bible that we don't say God's name. So if God told this name to Moses and told Moses to go tell the people what his name is, if it's meant to be a sign of God's intimacy and God's love, why on earth have we shrouded it in such mystery and prohibited ourselves from speaking it? When someone loves you, is there anything more beautiful than hearing them call your name with tenderness and affection? Whether it's your partner or your parent, why would we not call God's name? Then again, if you love someone, is there anything more painful than hearing them call your name with anger or disgust or contempt? Just like name giving is intimate, it's also vulnerable. Like Jacob, we might use God's name to take advantage or manipulate. We might use the name carelessly or in ways that are not in keeping with God's character. That's why the third commandment prohibits wrongful use of God's name. As I reflected on our congregation here at Eliot, it occurred to me that there might be another way to think about this restriction on the divine name. I think I've talked about this before. In the Cambodian community, I'm going to use you all as an example, it's quite unusual for people to call one another by name, right? I noticed it right away when I came here, but I didn't really know how to integrate it because in my culture you respect someone, you show respect for someone by calling them by usually their last name, maybe with a title, Mr. So-and-so or Dr. So-and-so. It's how you respect someone who's higher status than you, right? And if you want to show that you're close to somebody, you use their first name, maybe even a nickname. But in the Cambodian culture, you show respect for someone by not using their name. Instead, you call them an honorific, and I still can't keep them all straight. I've made notes and tried to remember, but they're words like and ming and bong and pu or on, and there's a right way to use which one, and I'm really trying hard to learn it. 4 years in, I still haven't quite figured it out. But you don't use the name, you use that honorific because it's a sign of respect in that culture. It would be disrespectful to just casually say someone's name. Sometimes even husbands and wives use those titles to speak to each other instead of their names. Among Cambodians and maybe some other cultures, not using someone's name casually is a sign of honor and respect. If I got that kind of wrong, you can correct me later. So maybe we can think of God's name this way. Its sound, Yahweh, is strange to our ears, much the way our own names, each other's names, sound strange to us if they come from another culture. Some of us find each other's names hard to pronounce, maybe even hard to remember. It reminds us that we are different. We're one, we're united, but we're not the same. And we respect and honor and celebrate our cultural differences. And so, like Cambodians who rarely use names to address one another, we can, by not overusing the divine name, show respect for God, who is at the same time both intimate and transcendent, who shares our sufferings, but also reigns with power. By not overusing the divine name, we remember that while God might choose to be like us and choose to be near us, we are not God, and we do not control God. In most cultures, as we've already discussed, names have meaning. They tell us something about the person or the parents who bestowed it. Maybe a name is a family name, it shows connections to your ancestors. I know Ghanaian people have a name that represents the day of the week on which they were born. We've studied some biblical names like Adam and Isaac and Miriam and Jacob. My friend in Bethlehem named his daughter, she has big brown eyes, he named her Ruah. It means vision. Some people think our names even have a way of shaping our lives. My first name is Heather, a flower. Is it a coincidence that I spent most of my young adulthood working in a flower shop? Or that the fastest man on earth is named Usain Bolt? I don't know. But I think that the fact that God gives his name shows us that God cares for God's people, that God draws close to us. The fact that God's name is almost unpronounceable, YHWH, Yahweh. I mean, it's almost just air. There's no hard consonants there. Yahweh. It's almost unpronounceable. It reminds us that God is powerful and transcendent beyond us. But the name itself, I am, also has meaning. In its most basic form, it means to be. When it's pronounced Yahweh, it means He is, or He will be. And actually, the way Hebrew works, that word could have lots of meanings. It could mean, I am who I am. I am the God who exists in and of myself. Or, I cause to be what I cause to be. It means I am the God who creates everything. I am who I will be. Or I will be who I am, is the God who is faithful to his own character, not capricious or changing on a whim. The power in this name is not only that God exists or creates or is present, but that God can be counted on to be God, to be faithful to his character and faithful to his promise. When Jesus speaks, especially in the Gospel of John, He identifies himself as the God who is and who will be. I am the bread of life. I am the vine. I am the good shepherd. Before Abraham was, I am. When the woman at the well says that the Messiah is coming, Jesus answers, I am. The God who speaks to Moses from the burning bush, the God who delivers Israel from slavery and oppression, that is the same God who draws near to humankind in the person of Jesus. The same God who delivers us from slavery to sin and death, who delivers the world from every injustice that still seems to reign. Yahweh, Jehovah, I am. We worship a God who whispers his strange name in our ears, reminding us that this God is wholly other than us, but draws near to us in our suffering and in our humanity. We worship a God whose name strikes fear in the hearts of the powerful and nurtures hope in the hearts of the powerless. We worship a God whose name tells a story of salvation that is still unfolding in your life and in mine. May you find that name, God's name, written on your heart, even as you remember that your own name is written on the palm of God's hand. May it be so for you, today and forever. Amen.